The insurance company offered a widow $10K for her burnt house. I got her $1.2 million. The pen was hovering over the check. Mrs. Higgins, a sweet 80-year-old widow, was shaking. She was sitting on a folding chair in front of the charred remains of her family home, which had burned down 3 days ago. Standing over her was Brad, a slick adjuster from Safeguard Insurance. He was smiling a predatory smile. "Just sign the release form, Mrs. Higgins," Brad said smoothly. $10,000. It is the best we can do. The house was old. Depreciation took away most of the value. If you don't sign today, the offer goes away and you get nothing." Mrs. Higgins was crying. She thought she had lost everything. She was about to sign away her rights to $1 million asset for the price of a used car. I stepped out of my truck and grabbed her hand just before the pen touched the paper. "Don't sign that," I said. Brad looked at me, annoyed. "Who are you, a neighbor?" "No," I said, handing him my business card. "I am a public adjuster. I represent Mrs. Higgins now, and I am rejecting your offer." "You can't reject it," Brad laughed. "The policy limit is firm. The house is worthless." "The house isn't worthless, Brad," I said. "You just don't know how to read the policy. You forgot to calculate the code upgrade coverage, the debris removal, and the loss of use. You offered her $10,000. By the time I'm done with you, you're going to write a check for $1.2 million. Brad turned pale. He knew who I was. I was the guy who cost his company $50 million last year. Here is the story of how I stopped an insurance giant from scamming an elderly woman and forced them to pay every single penny they owed. My name is Jack. I spent 10 years working for the big insurance companies. They trained me to be a shark. My job was simple: collect premiums and deny claims. They taught me the 3 Ds of the insurance business: delay, deny, defend. I quit when I realized I was ruining lives for a living. I switched sides. Now I am a public adjuster. That means I work for you, the policyholder, not the insurance company. I get paid a percentage of the settlement, so the more money I get for you, the more I make. I heard about Mrs. Higgins' fire on the scanner. It was a massive electrical fire in a historic district. When I arrived at the scene, the ashes were still smoking. Mrs. Higgins was sitting there, looking lost. And of course, the company adjuster, Brad, was already there. Company adjusters are like vultures. They swoop in when you're emotionally vulnerable. They act like your best friend. They say things like, "We will take care of you," but their goal is to close the claim for the lowest amount possible. I listened to Brad's pitch. "Look at this siding, Mrs. Higgins," Brad said, kicking a piece of burnt wood. "It is 50 years old. It is depreciated by 90%. We only owe you the actual cash value. That's the value of the wood today, not what it costs to buy new wood. Plus, your policy has a high deductible. After we do the math, the payout is about $10,000. Technically, Brad wasn't lying. He was just omitting the truth. Most policies do pay actual cash value initially, but they also have a clause called replacement cost value, RCV. This means if you actually rebuild the house, they have to pay the difference. Brad was trying to get her to accept a cash settlement right now. If she took the $10,000, she waived her right to the replacement cost. She would be left with a burnt lot and no money to rebuild. I stepped in. "Mr. Brad," I said firmly, "please step away from my client. All future communication goes through me." Brad sneered. "A public adjuster? You guys are leeches. You take 10% of her money." "I take 10% of the real value," I corrected. "You are trying to give her 1% of the value. Who is the leech?" Brad packed up his briefcase. "Fine. You want to play hardball? We will. But be warned, Jack. I am flagging this claim for special investigation. That means we freeze payments for 90 days. Let's see how long she can last without money." He drove away in his company car. Mrs. Higgins looked at me with teary eyes. "Who are you? Can you really help me?" "Mrs. Higgins," I said, "do you have a copy of your policy?" She handed me a thick binder. "My husband bought the Platinum package 30 years ago. We paid the premiums every month. We never missed a payment." I opened the binder. I scanned the declarations page. My eyes widened. This wasn't a standard policy. This was a guaranteed replacement cost policy from the 1990s. Insurance companies don't even sell these anymore because they are too expensive for them. It meant there was no limit on the payout. Brad knew this. He saw this policy, and he still offered her $10,000. This wasn't just lowballing. This was bad faith. In the insurance world, bad faith is a crime. It means the insurer is knowingly cheating the client, and the penalty for bad faith is punitive damages. "Mrs. Higgins," I smiled, "Brad just made a very expensive mistake. We aren't just going to rebuild your house. We are going to build you a mansion."
The first step in fighting an insurance company is to create your own estimate. The company adjuster will spend 1 hour walking through the site. I spent 3 days. I brought in my team, a structural engineer, a toxicologist, and a general contractor. We treated the burnt house like an archaeological dig site. Brad's estimate said, "Replace drywall, standard." My inspection revealed something else. Because the house was built in 1940, the walls weren't drywall. They were plaster and lath. To replace plaster requires specialized craftsmen. It cost 4 times as much as drywall. Then we went to the basement. Brad's report said, "Clean smoke damage." My toxicologist took samples. The insulation contained asbestos. This was the jackpot. When you touch asbestos during a renovation, you can't just clean it. By law, you have to bring in a hazmat abatement team. You have to seal off the house. The cost jumps from $5,000 to $150,000 instantly. And because Mrs. Higgins had the code upgrade clause in her Platinum policy, the insurance company had to pay for all of it. They had to pay to bring the entire 1940s house up to 2024 building codes. That meant rewiring the entire electrical system, $40,000. Replacing the lead pipes, $30,000. Installing fire sprinklers, $20,000. The asbestos abatement, $150,000. Brad estimated the loss at $150,000 total before depreciation. My preliminary estimate was already at $800,000. But I wasn't done. I looked at the personal property section. This is your stuff: clothes, furniture, electronics. Brad had given Mrs. Higgins a generic check for $5,000 for contents. I sat down with Mrs. Higgins. "We need to list everything," I said, "not just toaster." "What kind of toaster? Was it a Walmart toaster or a Breville?" "It was a Breville," she said. "That's $200, not $20. I wrote it down. We spent days going through photos. Her husband had a collection of first edition books. They were ash now, but under the policy, they were insured for replacement cost. To buy those rare books today would cost $50,000. I compiled a 200-page report. It was a weapon of mass financial destruction. Total claim value, $1,250,000. I emailed the report to Brad. I also copied his supervisor and the state insurance commissioner. I added a cover letter. Attached is the proof of loss. You have 30 days to pay, or I file a bad faith lawsuit seeking triple damages. Brad called me 10 minutes later. He wasn't laughing anymore. 2 days later, Brad called a meeting, but he didn't come to the burnt house. He summoned us to the regional corporate office of Safeguard Insurance. It was a power move. He wanted Mrs. Higgins to feel small. He wanted her to walk into a glass skyscraper and feel intimidated by the suits and the security guards. I drove Mrs. Higgins there myself. "Don't say a word," I told her. "Let me do the talking." We walked into a conference room. Brad was there, but he wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was a corporate attorney named Mr. Sterling. "Mrs. Higgins," Sterling began, his voice cold and clinical, "we have reviewed your public adjuster's estimate. We find it imaginative. $1.2 million for a house that Zillow values at $400,000? Zillow values the land," I cut in. "We are talking about reconstruction costs. Have you priced lumber lately? Have you priced specialized plaster labor?" "We are willing to increase our offer," Brad interrupted. "We will go up to $50,000, but that is it. Take it, or we drag this into litigation. And, Mrs. Higgins, if we go to court, we will demand an examination under oath. We will depose you for days. We will ask about every candle you ever lit. We will try to prove you started the fire yourself." Mrs. Higgins gasped. She grabbed my arm. They were accusing a sweet old lady of arson just to save money. This is a tactic called burning the claimant. They make the process so painful that you give up. I stood up. I didn't yell. I leaned over the table and spoke very quietly. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "you just threatened my client with a bad faith investigation without probable cause. I am recording this meeting, as allowed by state law." Sterling's eyes flickered. "Furthermore," I continued, "you are rejecting my proof of loss. That triggers the appraisal clause in the policy. I am hereby invoking appraisal. Litigation is off the table. We are going to arbitration." Brad looked at Sterling. He looked terrified. The appraisal clause is the insurance company's worst nightmare. It removes the decision from their hands and gives it to a neutral third party. It meant Brad couldn't bully us anymore. "You really want to go to appraisal over a burnt shack?" Brad sneered. "It's not a shack, Brad. It's $1 million payout waiting to happen. See you at the hearing." I walked Mrs. Higgins out. She was shaking. "What did you just do?" she asked. "I just took the checkbook out of their hands," I said.
The appraisal process works like this. I pick an appraiser, someone aggressive. The insurance company picks an appraiser, someone cheap, and together they pick a neutral umpire. The umpire is the judge. Whatever number the umpire writes down is final. It is binding in court. I picked my friend Mike as our appraiser. Mike is a structural engineer who hates insurance companies. Brad picked a corporate lackey named Steve. They agreed on a retired judge named Honorable Davis as the umpire. The hearing took place at the burnt house. Brad and Steve tried to play their games. "The asbestos isn't that bad," Steve argued. "We can just scrape it off." "Scrape it off," Mike countered, handing the umpire the toxicology report. "If you scrape it, you release fibers into the air. That is a federal EPA violation. You want to go to jail, Steve?" The umpire looked at the report. He adjusted his glasses. "The plaintiff is right. This requires full abatement. Add $150,000 to the total." Then we looked at the walls. "Drywall," Steve insisted. "Plaster," Mike said, hitting the remaining wall with a hammer. "It didn't crumble like drywall. It cracked like stone. This is 1940s horsehair plaster. To replicate this quality today requires artisan labor, $200 per square foot." The umpire nodded. "Agreed. Plaster." Item by item, Brad watched his savings evaporate. The rare books? Approved. The copper wiring? Approved. The slate roof? Approved. Then came the final blow. Loss of use. Because Brad had delayed the claim for 3 months with his lowball offers, Mrs. Higgins had been forced to live in a cheap motel. The policy guarantees her a standard of living equivalent to her home, I argued. She lives in a 4,000 square foot mansion. She should be in a luxury rental, not a motel. The umpire looked at Mrs. Higgins, frail and tired. He looked at Brad in his expensive suit. "Agreed," the umpire said. "We are awarding retroactive housing allowance at $10,000 a month for the last 3 months and for the next 12 months of construction." That was another $150,000 instantly added to the bill. At the end of the day, the umpire wrote the final number on the award sheet. Brad looked at it and nearly fainted.
total award, $1,150,000. Plus, because the umpire ruled that the initial offer of $10,000 was grossly inadequate, the insurance company was liable for my fees separately. Brad pulled me aside as we were packing up. "Jack, please, my bonus is tied to my loss ratio. This claim is going to ruin my year." "You tried to ruin her life, Brad," I said, pointing to Mrs. Higgins. "You tried to steal her retirement to get a bonus. You deserve to lose it."
2 weeks later, a courier arrived at the motel. He handed Mrs. Higgins a thick envelope. Inside was a check from Safeguard Insurance for $1,150,000. Mrs. Higgins didn't scream. She just sat on the edge of the bed and wept silently. It wasn't just money. It was dignity. It was verification that her husband's 30 years of paying premiums wasn't a waste. Because of the payout, we didn't just rebuild the old house, we upgraded it. We built a modern, energy-efficient home with a wheelchair-accessible layout so she could live there comfortably for the rest of her life. We even built a custom library for a new collection of books. I took my fee, 10% of the settlement. It was a good payday. But the best part was the letter I received a month later. It was from Safeguard Insurance. It wasn't a threat. It was a notification that Brad had been reassigned to a desk job in claims processing, the lowest rung on the ladder. He would never step foot on a disaster site again. The insurance industry relies on people giving up. They rely on you taking the first offer because you are tired and scared. They call it claims adjustment. I call it bullying. But I proved that if you know the codes, read the policy, and refuse to be intimidated, you can beat them. Mrs. Higgins is safe now. Her home is beautiful, and every time I drive by, I see smoke coming from her chimney, not from a fire, but from a warm hearth that the insurance company paid for. If you ever have a claim, remember, the adjuster is not your friend. The policy is your friend. Read it. Fight for it. Thanks for watching. If you want to know what to do immediately after a car accident or a house fire to maximize your claim, I've made a checklist linked below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice.